Okay. We have Shuo Yang to tell us about her idea. This is the Research Atelier. Come with an idea, leave with a paper. We've got 4 mentors, Aslı Arikan, Beth Rose, Ram Mudambi, and Alvaro Cuellar Cazura. Sure, let's start with you. 2 minutes.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much for your precious time. So today, the idea I'm presenting comes from when I'm going through the literature, especially on the CEO turnovers, I discovered disproportional attention on the CEO dismissals, especially about the reasons driving CEO dismissals. And a lot of the idea papers emphasizing on the board initiate the CEO turnover as the driver. And I think there is an overlooked, aspect behind the reasons of CEO turnover. And hence, I looked into, the studies, capturing the definition of CEO dismissals. And I think I see a systematic categorization over near retirement age CEO turnover as one CEO dismissal subgroup. And there is another subgroup, which is the early tenure CEO dismissals. So I started to question, why do you systematically just automatically categorize those events as dismissal rather than CEO voluntary departure? So I am looking at another data set discovers company misconducts. So they are gathering information from newspapers to dispose companies' malpractice in the labor, in environmental issues. So I'm trying to look in this paper is about what if CEOs, after they assume their office, their position in the company, what if the corporate social misconduct will give them information about problems within the company, which will make them to take the departure after their position. So in this paper, we will look into use models like survival models or use conditional logic models to look at whether the CEOs will their decisions to leave the company will be impacted by the company's misconduct information. So the data set is ready, and the time of this span of study will be between 2007 to 2023, and there will be a lot of rich information, from all those public companies. We can also control for some other informations about whether the company is having financial problems. We can also control for effect over some other problems like mergers, acquisitions, or the financial restatement or the stock option backdating, issues, stuff like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let me stop you. This is 3 minutes, 6 seconds. Okay. Who wants to go first?
We can just go alphabetically. Asli will be first, right? Then
sure. Asli, why don't you start? You got 4 minutes.
Okay. In terms of positioning, sometimes when we're so close to the data and we're mesmerized by it, we prioritize talking about it. But if we take a step back, then you have to consider the broad question of staying and leaving. I know some of your work touches upon that. And then if departure is going to be because of your own analysis as a top executive of the firm, because you figured things out that you didn't know before, then I can understand the misconduct information that predates what the executive's joining date. So I'm hoping you're gonna have a little bit more information about what is the nature of the question you're looking at, besides how you're measuring it.
What should it be, Aslı? What should the nature of the question be?
Okay, spotlight, I get it. So we have, if I come back from the theory perspective, we have agency theory that explains or mainly used in CEO departures and reason not to depart or reason to depart. So in this case, agency theory works both ways. And some of it is going to be related to if they discover something others didn't know, insiders, outsiders, then they would want to leave. That's also related to agency theory. But if you want to reverse that around, and if you want to stick around, although you know that the firm is in trouble for whatever reason, and you listed several reasons, then you might consider that it's about career advancements, getting promotions, and having a turnaround story for labor markets for executives. So I can see a tension in that. I can also see different types of misconduct information, how that influences departure. And that might be very interesting because you might consider types of misconduct that is certain, whether it was a legal action that was taken against the firm or whether it is interpretive. So, which is a little bit more on the gray side, that the CEO has a chance to act on it, to reverse it. So I could see those two routes so far.
Thank you. Shuo, have you got a question for Aslı on the first 4 minutes?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's go with Alvaro, please.
The topic is corporate governance. It is very well analyzed in strategy, in organizational behavior, in finance. It's a really big topic, and especially there is a very well-established literature. What I'm trying to understand, or what I'd like you to explain, is what's different, special about this. Why is this important, given that this has been studied for decades? And it's not a matter of whether in the last few years there is more papers on this issue or the other, but what is driving your interest, what is happening in the real world. It will be good if instead of just focusing on the broad discussion, you could illustrate this with examples, and you could narrow this down, because you can have the voluntary, involuntary departures. You can have the asymmetry of information story, which seems to be basically what you're explaining, that somebody comes and they basically decide to move out because there are problems, or there could be problems and they happen to know about them. Beautiful examples of what is happening with what happened recently with Boeing and all the different problems they had, and all of a sudden they basically got rid of the CEO. They are looking for a new one. It will be good if you can bring it from the theoretical academic world into the real life. What is happening? Board revolts, what happened with the OpenAI and Sam Altman that was kicked out by the board, and then he was basically reinstated. There are lots of really good examples that I think will be really good for you to bring everything down to the specific issue you are discussing. Because if you are looking for CEO replacement, dismissal, there is too many different drivers, and it's difficult with a database to identify them. My guess is that, yes, there is a lot of dismissal and being forced out because the information happens to be revealed in newspapers, whereas if you decide to live quietly, there is very little information about that. And it can be an agreement between the board and the CEO that, well, there are problems, but just go and retire early rather than we don't like what you're doing. So there might be a story with the database that there is a bias, because with all databases, more relevant events and what happens to be on the newspaper is what we think is important, whereas there is a lot of things that are behind the scenes. So the question I have is, have you done interviews with companies, with managers to try to understand the phenomenon rather than rely on database-driven information. Have you done some cases, even if it is not direct interviews, at least overall information on different examples so that you can identify different stories? And what is different, special about your study? Because this is a really big topic that has been studied for a long time. And the challenge you are going to face is what is unique in this particular context setting. You have 2007 to 2023. So you have the post-crisis of the...
I lost audio.
Sorry.
Alvaro.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay. Alvaro, I couldn't catch the last part of your section. We lost audio.
You have a long period. There are different events. You have a couple of crises. You have COVID-19. You have 2008 financial crisis. There are lots of different events that are going to drive different dismissals, replacements. What is special? What is unique about this? Is my question.
Sorry. Okay, thank you. Now, sure, don't respond yet. Aslı finds the paper too theoretical. Alvaro doesn't like the fact that it is overly researched area, but it's not really that interesting yet. So we're going to come back to him in the next round, and he's going to tell you exactly what's so interesting that you should be doing. So Alvaro has time to think about it. Ram, in the meantime, is going to tell you exactly how you're going to save this idea. Ram Murambe.
I prepared a few comments on the basis of what I was sent, and so obviously I may overlap with something you've already heard from Asli and from Alvaro. But like both of them, this is a very well-studied area. And when you have an area which has been studied for so long in so many different fields, from, as Alvaro pointed out, all from finance to strategy to economics to you name it, the hook is crucial. So you need some kind of a hook. And two kinds of hooks. Alvaro suggested some. There could be a data hook. Maybe so they passed a new law that all of a sudden made some data available that wasn't available before. And you could say, well, okay, before that we don't have this data, now we have this data. Then of course that reduces asymmetric information. The board knows this now, they didn't know this before, or something like that. And that could be some kind of a hook. And if that happened relatively recently, then you have a reason to do this study. Another hook could be an external shock of some sort. As Alvaro pointed out, all kinds of shocks that happened recently, the financial crisis, you had COVID, all kinds of things like that. And then you could use that as a means of specifying, where the before after kind of thing. The second thing is the overall event set that you've got here is CEO change. Asli, I think, mentioned this to some extent, and you need to categorize these into voluntary versus involuntary departures, right? Now, in some cases, and typically what these are going to show up is they're going to show up as right tail and left tail departures. So your left tail departures, you get fired, because you underperform or something, or you misconduct or something like that. But you distinguish those two different, very distinct things. So underperformance versus misconduct are very different, different precursors. And right tail departures, of course, your CEO, you did really well, and you got hired away, decided to do a much better job, and so you leave. So that's you need to distinguish between those. It isn't always clear in the data, right? All you know is the CEO departed. You don't know. Sometimes they'll explicitly tell you that he was, there was fraud or something like that, and he got fired, or the word actually fired might show up in the press, but that's not always the case. I mean, very often they tend to kind of window dress and say, well, okay, well, to pursue other opportunities. sort of thing. So, or they might retire. And retirement could be a voluntary retirement, or it could be or they can basically tell you, that just showed up. That's what the data says we retired. The press said he retired, but really it was a firing. So all of these things mean that collecting the data is categorizing all your departures is going to be very important and not obvious, not easy. Okay, so and you mentioned in your write-up that the research literature is focused on CO dismissals rather than succession. Now this does not imply CO entrenchment. I mean, just because all the papers are on CO dismissal rather than, that doesn't mean anything. It could be data availability. Maybe data is available more for dismissal than for something else. Or it could be the case that researchers find dismissals more interesting because dismissal implies discontinuity, where succession implies continuity, right? So if I get a succession and I'm a CEO, I get my handpicked successor to continue after me, then we don't get any discontinuity in what happens at the firm, right? Because basically the same policies get, whereas, so you may not see anything. It might be nice, very smooth. Whereas if you have dismissal, then you're going to get a discontinuity, right? So, and that of course is easier to study, right? So a drunk under a lamppost kind of thing, where ultimately, you search on a lamppost, not because that's where the keys are, because that's where the light is. And finally, you need to define, you just mentioned, in the paper maybe mentioned, define social misconduct. I mean, it wasn't exactly, it was kind of, even in an abstract, if you're writing this in a journal, you better specify, exactly what do you mean? So corporate social misconduct could be anything, right? And finally, the last thing I'd say, you might want to consider again, given the fact that the external environment has all these shocks that have happened, consider a 2x2 and put all your data into 4 boxes where you get basically CO performance, high, low, and external environment, good, bad, right? So ultimately, if you have a very good environment and CO performance is very bad, that's one box, versus if you have a very bad environment and the CO performance is very good. That's obviously a very, very good high performing CEO. So if you categorize the data that 4-way that categorization, that gives you a start towards addressing the first thing I started about, basically, categorizing what you're seeing. Is it a dismissal or is it
Thank you, Ram. Let me stop you right there. Sure, we're making good progress, actually. We're trying to find a good hook. Ram is asking for a hook, Alvaro is asking for a hook, Asli is asking for a hook, and the answer is going to come from Beth, and she's going to give you exactly what that hook is.
Don't know. I'm not. I don't think I'm there yet, because I have to say I read the first line of the abstract, or first two sentences of the abstract, and went, great. They read 22 papers. That's it. It wasn't motivating for me. It didn't draw me in. So as is already, I'm going to parrot what's already been done, what's already been mentioned to a large degree. You've got to really motivate this. And, for example, what's the dismissal versus quit ratio, such as you can measure, because I think your measurement issues are a mess. Sorry. I know I love starting with data. I really do. But in this case, I think you've really got to push your data and question it. What's the dismissal quit ratio in reality? Is this a big issue? How are you defining corporate social misconduct, which actually came as a big jolt to me in the abstract? How are you going to assess that? And you can only count stuff that's reported. I guess I don't know where your database is picking this up. So you're kind of, I think you're got as a reviewer, I would look at this and go, wow, there's some serious assumptions and biases, because you just can't get at everything. And you're going to have to address that clearly. Don't just assume the reviewers won't pick it up. Stupid things like, what's retirement age? It depends I assume this is American data. There's not a big retirement age, whereas in other countries there would be. So, someone who's near retirement age, someone who's 50 might want to retire. and someone who's 75 might not. So you've got to, I think you're going to have to be really careful there. And I guess I was really missing a theoretical basis, which I get it. It's hard to fit a lot in an abstract, but that does need to go in. And is it always, or even usually, the CEO that falls on the sword? You're assuming that if there is misconduct, however you're defining it, that it's the CEO who's going to take the fall. If CEOs are that overconfident and narcissistic, they can probably, which I don't think is always the case, they can probably, there's a good chance they'll find it might be the second in command or somebody else who has to leave, in the case of misconduct. So you're making the assumption, I think, that it's always going to be the CEO, but I think that's something you're going to have to work through. And whether, as Ram already mentioned, the assumption that of voluntary versus involuntary, I mean, it's pretty easy to weave a good story for the press about how, as Ram said, we're going to pursue other options. You can probably assume that person was highly encouraged to leave. I mean, one way to look at it might be what sort of a golden parachute package they get. I don't know, I don't know enough about this area, but I think you're going to have to be really clever about measuring things and making convincing arguments that what you're measuring is what you're really assuming. And also, I disagree with Ron that succession is not necessarily continuity. We're experiencing that in my organization right now. We had a handpicked successor and everything's changed for my institute. But yeah, there are just a lot of assumptions that you have to make, that you're currently making, and you're going to have to make assumptions, but you're going to have to justify them really, really carefully. Otherwise, at a top journal, the reviewers are going to pick it apart. So I think you need to really think about what it is that you're looking for, but don't just find what you're looking for. I mean, it would be great if you could find something quirky.
Thank you. Now we're going to, in the second round, we're going to make some suggestions, recommendations to fix what you just mentioned in the first round. I want to start off with the idea. Alvaro mentioned something, Boeing CEO and Altman story, the one who was replaced 5 times overnight. I don't know what kind of a style that was, but is this a new thing? Is Alvaro talking about a new style of succession going bad? Is this new CEO dismissal routine? Or is it the same thing, different people, or a different reality? Very interesting stories given the motivation in the stakeholder theory is different, the behavioral theory is different right now. Our maximization problems are different. Yeah, we just critique the paper, we just tore it apart. I'm on the side of the author here in this series, Research Atelier. I would like to hear a solution. Tell her, do this because of such and such. Do this industry. Look at this CEO. Let's start again with Aslı, please. 3 minutes.
Okay. So I've been listening to all of us, and one thing I notice is I think in terms of all the things that can happen, all the variables that we can create and different categories we can come up with, we have an issue of verification, whether our classification is actually true or not. And we also have a variety of factors that's influencing what we find and how we interpret it. So I'm going to come at it at a very, slightly different angle than I initially thought. Now if we parse this environment, what do we know? We know that there will be some announcement that's going to be made by the firm about this executive, whatever that might be. Now that announcement, if we look at that as our unit of analysis, it is going to take shape depending on who the person is, what the firm has experienced, and what the environment looks like. So if the study can unpack the relationship between, for instance, if the firm isn't experiencing anything itself and there's nothing significant related to corporate governance going on in the environment, and you would have to control industry dynamics naturally, but I'm talking about in the sense that, you know, there's no backdating scandal, for instance. How are the executive replacement announcements, for whatever reason, departure announcements or succession announcements or rehire or hire announcements, change depending on what the firm is experiencing, simultaneously how is the environment and who the person is? I think that would be a very good, solid contribution because it would help kind of shape the literature that has evolved looking at maybe one variable of each, but not really focusing on the other influences. So this is in my mind is like a more of a phenomena driven paper that maybe has a table in the back that lists all the kind of arrows between these three dynamics, who the person is, the context, is the person retiring, is the person coming after after some sort of an experience gap that the firm had. So about the person, about the firm, and about the environment. And from that table, we would deduce that we don't know the whole picture. And this paper kind of builds on that literature and looks at the main themes of the person, the firm, and the environment.
Thank you, Aslı. Alvaro.
Okay, let's see if I can convince you to take the paper in a very different direction, which is forget about top management teams, CEO dismissal, and all that corporate governance literature, and instead go into the sustainability literature. And basically how companies that misbehave or well behave, whichever way you want, but let's go with the misbehavior because that's what you introduced. To what extent is the misbehavior in the company going to be leading to the dismissal of the top person or not? What does it take for events? What kind of events? What is the degree importance of those events that will eventually lead companies, boards, to basically not only try to address the event, but basically say that, well, the CEO is at the end of the day the person who is responsible for everything to be aligned with the values of the company and the laws and regulations, and he or she did not do the job and basically is being fired. So I think it could be a simpler story, because if you bring all the CEO turnover, dismissal, reappointments, and all these things, there are lots of different stories that you can tell. You could narrow it down to the corporate social responsibility. What is the degree, the event, the types of issues that happen that eventually lead to the replacement of the person at the top. If there is information on other managers, it will be nice to get basically a gradation of the person at the top, or maybe it's just the person in charge of the division, or maybe, which is typically what happens with misbehavior, companies push all the responsibility down to the basically line employees. It could get a different story. I think it will be easier to basically clarify a novelty, and especially nowadays with the importance of sustainability for companies and also in research. I think it's one way to basically connect with a very different set of individuals, yes, but at the same time, I think it will be an easier conversation.
It was interesting. Like, Shuo, did you understand the concept? Okay, Ram, what do you say? How to improve, make the paper sexy?
I think I would also taking it a little different direction, I must say. But I mean, given that this, I'm assuming there's some database underlying this abstract already, and I'm trying to sort of work with that to the extent of what I've deduced, which of course may not be correct. I think the thing that I would be interested in seeing is, rather than CEO dismissals, I would, because I think, first of all, I think that's next to impossible to categorize, to specify that this is a dismissal, this is not a dismissal. I'd be very suspicious of anything, any database that led to that, because you're either going to get under categorization, over categorization, depending on how we do it. But change is change. You know, the Shuo did change, so that is unambiguously true. So the way to go would be might be to look at CEO change drivers. Okay, so what are the things that lead to CEO change? Unfortunately, this of course has been enormously studied. So this is so you may want to look at some kind of CEO change drivers before and after some major shock. All right, so basically you say, well, split your data at some point, either in 2009 or in 2020, based on, say, for example, the financial shock, which is less useful in some ways, but it's far enough back in time that you get more data, or 2020, and then CEO change drivers are fundamentally different before and after. And see if you could theorize as to why that might be the case. I mean, why would you expect this particular major shock to lead to a change in the way that CEOs change, or CEOs move? Another way forward would be to maybe look at CEO change drivers in different categories of ex-post CEO performance. In other words, one thing that people persistently complain about, and for the life of me, in the last 35, 40 years, I've never seen a study that examined this, but it's always in the Wall Street Journal, that basically says that, CEOs, they take a company and they crash and burn it, and they just jump to another even better job, and they crash and burn that company, and so on and so on, and this sort of thing, where kind of see it. Now, is this just Wall Street Journal reporting, or is there some reality to this? In other words, do CEOs who crash and burn companies, do they actually get penalized in the executive job market or not? Again, I'm willing to be, Asli, Beth, or Albert, you could maybe there's some famous study that I don't know about, but at least to the best of my knowledge, I'm not aware of anything that looks at that. Where you essentially look at it, say that the CEO of Boeing, for example, pretty much crashed and burned the company. Now, what's happening to this guy? I mean, is he likely to, is he just going to retire and play golf, or is he going to, go on to get some other phenomenal job? So I think that's something that you could certainly examine. Now, in terms of, and you have lots of control. You have CEO age, and as Beth pointed out, obviously it's difficult to tell in the U.S. where there's no explicit retirement age, but there are some incentives to retire, right? Basically, your age regard to Medicaid, your age regard to your Social Security, and all these sorts of things. And maybe so there's some golden parachutes that cash in. I mean, if you get at some particular point where that's going to make it much more strong, and you're much more strongly incented.
Thank you.
Retire.
Sure, you got two great ideas. One is sure bet, sustainability. Second idea is superbly sexy. Just Ram said about do these unsuccessful CEOs really get promoted to bigger and better jobs with more pay, which might be the case, as Wall Street Journal underlined. We're going to have hear from Beth. After Beth, I would like to have everyone tell us one hypothesis based on what they think this revised paper should have. One hypothesis from each person, please, after Beth. Beth, you got 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, so I love the Rum's angle of post-leaving behavior. I think that's really, really fascinating, and I haven't seen anything like that. And that would be a brilliant hook. I was also thinking, you could look at what type, if you can categorize this, and how many observations are you looking at broadly?
What do you mean, like the CEO turnover observations?
Yeah.
Or we're looking
Big.
at
just ballpark.
I think 8,000 turnovers.
Okay. So what you could then think about what, building on what Alvaro said, what sort of corporate social misconduct, but you have to categorize it well, leads to replacement. And it would be much better not to just look at CEOs, but I can see why you would want to stick with CEOs. Is there something in the board CEO relationship that you can tease out that helps to predict? So there's some fractious relationships, just from the start. Can CEOs survive that? What about industry differences? There are different industry norms, and we tend to just control for industry using dummy variables. But I would suspect being CEO of an investment bank versus a traditional, Midwestern manufacturing company would be very, very different in terms of churn and in terms of pressure and in terms of the fractiousness of the relationship. That I think is something that could tease this out. And you have to do interviews, because right now you're going into this making big assumptions, and those assumptions could just get blown out of the water. And you might also find with the interviews, you get some brilliant hook or some brilliant different angle that's in addition to the ones you're getting here. So that's me. We're running out of time.
Beautiful. Thank you. Aslı? You're muted.
Okay, I'm gonna move closer to Alvaro, and then I'm gonna add and borrow a little bit from Beth and also Ram to add board versus top management team in their turnover or in their moves after a sustainability related misbehavior. So we focused on CEO, but what about the directors and board members? Is there some action in that space? Because I can see competing hypotheses in the sense that, if you're a board member and there's a scandal, and I can see myself resigning and saying, I told them, they didn't listen to me. It kind of improves my cachet as a sustainability sensitive director and improves my market value in the market for board of directors. I can also see myself not resigning, because then I would be complicit, and I might kind of try to ride it out and see what happens. And then at the end of the day, I can always say we didn't have the full information and kind of put the full blame on the top management team. So there could be some sort of teasing out in terms of directors versus top management team. However many detailed your management ranks are in that data, I would use all of them to see if there's a different shakeout depending on the type of sustainability concern that's raised about the firm. And definitely interviews would be very good. And I also, because I know your work, you have a paper that looks at turnover and what they do after they leave. So you've gotten some really good feedback that there's a really good hook there. So you can pursue that paper out of your dissertation with much enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aslı. Alvaro?
Hypothesis. If you take the sustainability story, my suggestion will be to split it into the 3 dimensions. Question is, the database is US companies only or global?
It has global companies, but I think we have a good coverage from the CompuStat. So it will be public companies and global companies as well.
No, but what I mean is, are you covering companies in the US capital markets or all publicly traded companies?
So if we're looking at the CEO turnover, we will just look at the American public companies.
Okay. because in that case, it's a different story in the sense that ESG means different things across countries. And here you have a story of regulations and impact. And my guess will be you could play with the difference across environmental, social, and governance. My guess, governance issues are likely to lead to dismissal much more often than environmental or social. If you have some problems with accounting, if you have problems with diversity, it's basically replace the person at the top because she or he is supposed to be the setting the example and controlling everybody else. Environmental issues can be blamed on, well, we had a problem with quality control or there was a spill and so sorry. Social issues are much less of an issue. Oh, we need some training for the employees and we are going to solve them or we are going to make some donations. So there is going to be a difference across the three dimensions. You can also play with differences across time, especially because you have a long period of time. And maybe, especially after the if you want, during the crisis 2008, there was a lot of pushback against companies getting bailouts and CEOs and things like this. There might be much more of a preference for boards to basically get rid of CEOs to get rid of the problem versus the period after the crisis when the economy was doing relatively well. So all of a sudden it's less of an issue. So you could play with these stories. COVID is another very nice example of the before and after. What do you do when you have this huge crisis here? You could play with these things. And my guess again is there is going to be a difference, not only across the three dimensions, but also across periods of time. And it's mostly a response to stakeholder pressures, if you want. You could play also with the political issue. And because you have the pre and post-Trump, which also changed all the debate about what companies should be focusing on, you can play with basically differences. Typically, differences is how we do the analysis, but try to play with differences and basically predict that, yes, misbehavior in general, let's go deeper. It's not the same type of a story. It's not the same that, well, there was an event in a Starbucks and they basically called the police because a couple of black men were having coffee so we're sitting down without having coffee. And then all the employees were basically given training. Not quite the same story as all of a sudden there is an accounting hole and we don't really know what is happening. You can play with those things. And you can play with also the company responses to them. This is misbehavior. To what extent can you fix it within the company? Or this is just perceived from the outset to be so problematic that you have to get rid of the person. Example, what happened with Boeing, which is it's not one quality issue, it's just one after the other. Big signal, we are getting rid of the CEO and we're going to basically reorganize all the organizational processes. There are lots of things that they can play with, and it will be comparisons if you go with the route of irresponsibility and dismissal.
Thank you, Alvaro.
Thank you.
Ram?
I'm going to give you a very simple hypothesis, okay? Just one, right? I got that for one hypothesis. There's one hypothesis. I don't know how much data you have post 2020, but assuming there's enough data before and after 2020, assuming. One thing all of us learned with COVID-19 was the tremendous, I think everybody got a wake-up call about before the crisis, before the pandemic. We all said, oh, IT is nice, and we have it, and we have these capabilities, blah, blah, blah. But after the pandemic hit, all of a sudden we realized, certainly universities, and I think it's also true, and I've done lots of interviews with people, with top executives, and suddenly they realized how much they could do with IT capabilities. In other words, they had a lot of latent capabilities. They had no idea how much they could actually do. We had no idea at university. They could run the entire university, the teaching experience online. Certainly at Temple, we did not know that. But literally within 3 weeks, we were doing it, right? Literally, the capabilities were there, but nobody knew that we had them. and we implemented them immediately. So what I would suggest is that you might expect a U-shaped relationship between IT expertise and CEO turnover before and after 2020. And the reason why it'd be U-shaped, I would expect, is that basically, if you have a CEO with very little IT experience, you're more likely to get dismissed because, well, I mean, he's the wrong guy. We don't need this guy. He doesn't have the skill set we need. If you have a lot of IT experience, then you might expect that that guy's going to be headhunted, right? So obviously, if somebody who's really extremely, basically, if he's an IT guru, everybody wants him, right? Now, just like basically you're trying to get AI guys. I mean, you can't keep them. Anybody who knows about AI is going to get hired away immediately. So they're tremendously right too. Now, assuming that but you could do the same thing with financial/accounting expertise after 2009, right? So basically, this was basically a financial crisis, that being a financial or an accounting expert is going to be quite valuable. Actually, this is completely by the by, is it not? But a cousin of mine was at that time the chairman of a big six accounting firm in Asia. He after the crisis hit, all of a sudden he's a big accounting guy, and every single major Indian corporation was trying to lure him away to be chairman because they really need people who know understand accounting now. And he said the inbox was just people were offering double and triple his pay with that. So that might be something you would expect to see, that if CEOs that have very weak contextual knowledge that has been exposed as important might be more likely to have more turnover probability, and those have a lot higher. And in the middle, you'd get this, of course. So that'd be kind of if you could find that, it'd be kind of cute, and it'd certainly be publishable.
Thank you. Finally, Beth.
Okay, this is less of an hypothesis, but I think that you could build on, first of all, stick with the US because it's going to get seriously messy if it's international. As you've heard, the definitions are different and there's just too much difference, and you're trying to find something fairly subtle. But I'd also extend what Alvaro said, which I thought was very cool, different types of misconduct. But also you could all then also look at what matters in different industries. This is more of a research question than a hypothesis. Sorry, haven't had enough coffee. But I think that would be very, very interesting.
Thank you. Sure. Final comment from you. Are you happy?
I am.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
You overwhelmed?
Holding the idea. I know a lot of good ideas, from you guys. It's, I appreciate it. Very, honest and genuine advices. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
I'll stop the
everybody
recording now.
take care. All right, I will see you.